my general macro framework is that we're watching incumbents, giant monopolistic corporates that have basically bullied people, for years on the regulatory side, are crumbling. People are pushing back. Capital is susceptible to labor now in the ways that it hasn't been before. And a lot of these macroeconomic things that we were just used to are coming crumbling down. So, and I think, the baseline political philosophy layer is really important.
Hey everyone, this episode is sponsored by Polkadot. Polkadot is the largest community DAO, empowering 1.3 million DOT holders to shape the future of the network through active participation. With over 500 applications backed by over $6 billion in shared security, Polkadot's adaptable technology powers a diverse ecosystem from DeFi to AI. Join the Polkadot DAO and be part of that transformation. This episode is sponsored by Ledger. This Black Friday, Ledger is offering an incredible deal to secure your digital assets. From November 29th to December 5th, upgrade to Ledger Flex and get $70 in Bitcoin. Plus, save up to 40% on select Ledger Nano wallets and accessories. These deals are only available while supplies last, so don't wait. Visit Ledger's website at ledger.com today to take advantage of the best offers of the year and protect your assets with the global leader in digital asset security. This episode is sponsored by Mantra. The Mantra chain is the purpose-built Layer 1 blockchain designed for tokenized real-world assets and regulated digital assets, offering scalable, high-performance architecture. Positioned as the blockchain for tokenized RWAs, Mantra is onboarding traditional financial institutions into Web3. Join the ongoing OM Gendrop campaign and be part of the future of regulated digital assets today.
Welcome to On the Margin. I'm Tyler Neville, and we're going to start this episode with a nice little story. So there are these two young fish swimming along, and they happen to meet an older fish swimming the other way, who nods at them and says, "Morning, boys. How's the water?" And the two young fish swim on for a bit, and then one of them looks at the other one and goes, "What the hell is water?" The point of the fish story is merely to say that the most obvious, important realities are often the ones that are hardest to see and talk about. So today, I want to try something a little bit different, and you're either going to love it or you're going to hate it. But we're going to talk about political philosophy, and I want to get across the fact that the political philosophy is the ones and zeros of investment. Without a background in political philosophy, you can miss major turning points in history. And I think we're in the midst of a tectonic shift that could unleash huge opportunities if you have the right framework. The problem with most modern investment analysis is that it becomes a factory line of monotonous thought and misses big structural shifts. I think once you understand that philosophical backdrop is changing, you'll realize that Bitcoin sits perfectly as a global reserve asset in this new system we're entering. So today, I wanted to introduce you to Dr. Michael Millerman, who runs the eponymous Millerman School. And he's an academic and iconoclast that tries to lean against the consensus narratives. That's who I'm naturally attracted to. I love hearing from people who say things that everyone thinks, but no one will say out loud. So Michael falls into that category. And as Peter Thiel says, you can learn more from an atheist in Alabama than you can learn from a Christian. So I also have to caveat this interview. It's by no means a political statement, but it's just an adventure into academia. So just keep an open mind when you're hearing some of this stuff, because it's obviously touchy in this political backdrop that we're in right now. So with that, Michael, would you introduce yourself? Sorry for the long intro.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. So yeah, I have a background as an academic. I studied political science and political philosophy at the University of Toronto. And I was interested from the start of my academic career in maybe the unusual question of how politics relates to metaphysics, to ontology, or to abstract philosophical ideas. I don't know why, but it just always intrigued me that there's some relationship there. And if you change one side of the equation, the other one changes too. So all of my work in undergraduate and graduate philosophy was on that topic, but it brought me into some controversial domains. Some of the people that I work on are alive and they're kind of not liberals. And in a generally liberal academic environment, that was a bit of a problem. So after graduating from Toronto, I sort of went my own way, kind of iconoclast, independent, as you said. And that's why I ended up teaching on my own. I set up my own shop and I teach online, I write online, and I'm out of the established academic milieu now. And, I think I was lucky to get out early. Although I do hope that now with the latest election, academia may change and free up a little bit from where it was before. But I mean, that's my background. I'm really interested in the deep hidden dimension of politics, which tends to take us into philosophical dimensions.
Well, thanks for being here. And so I found you on your YouTube channel, and you did a breakdown of Peter Thiel's The Straussian Moment. And that's an essay he wrote in 2004, which basically re-examines the social contract throughout history. And so I reached out to you and I said, can you explain this to me? Let's reverse engineer what Peter's thinking, because this guy has been so consistently right throughout, the past 30 years on how things have unwound, whether it's in investing or politics, et cetera, that I wanted to kind of understand his framework and how it works. So could you give us a rough overview to start on the Straussian moment and kind of go through, I guess, the history of the philosophers he covers in that? And in the end, I know we're gonna touch on these philosophers, but I do want to wrap it back to like Bitcoin as a global reserve asset, but this is the framework throughout history that no one really talks about and people don't generally understand. So I guess we'll start with that.
Yeah, well, Thiel himself is a great example of somebody who thinks in this middle ground between politics and something more than politics. He always applies theological categories, or in some sense, even mystical, for sure religious and philosophical, in the essay, The Straussian Moment, which if the viewers and listeners haven't read, I strongly recommend doing so. So the Straussian Moment is a reconsideration of the whole period of modernity. And that means we have to understand what modernity is for Thiel, why it matters, and why we need to reconsider it. It's framed by the attacks of 9/11, which he says came as a shock to us because they reminded us that there are still parts and places in the world for whom religion matters enough that they can't just be bought off with a bigger paycheck or a nicer car or some other of the conveniences of modern life, that they care enough about their faith, about the afterlife, about the soul, whatever else matters to them in the way that they see it, in a way that's kind of belongs to the past of the West. The West has been on a trajectory where all of those kinds of things have been overcome. We have a liberal, democratic, capitalist, commercial, bourgeois society where what matters is comfortable self-preservation, just living well. And it's not really the case as much in modern Western thought and history that people are willing to kill and die for big ideas. In fact, as Thiel argues in his paper, the West, the modern West, is in part constructed out of the desire to get away from fundamental debates because of their potential violence. So in order that we don't kill each other over our disagreements, we compromise by putting the big questions off to the side. Let's just leave them alone. We no longer, Thiel says, raise the question, who is the human being? What is it to be? What's the nature of the divine in its relationship to mankind? We don't ask those questions, but they came into the Western world on 9/11 again. They reminded us that there's an outside that is not part of Western enlightenment or Western political modernity. And he says that this forced the Western world to reconsider its origins. And so the first figure that he looks at in doing so is John Locke. He says Locke is in effect the philosopher whose thoughts form the basis of American Republican government. Not Republican Party, but America as such, the American political program. And when he discusses Locke, he focuses in on the fact that Locke shut down these big questions and the ways in which Locke did that. So somehow subtly, not necessarily by dropping grenades onto those questions, but by redefining them, by being silent about some things, by substituting some subject matter into his interpretation of Christianity, making it in effect synonymous with just rationality. And in doing so, Locke oriented the American mind and the Western mind towards individual rights, property rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, all of which is good. We're not disputing that those things are good. They're important, that America owes a lot to them, but just that they replace the different way of thinking about man, a different model of man's nature, of man's soul, of what matters the most. So in the classical models, the pursuit of property was not the fundamental good. And you weren't just an individual. You had obligations to the city, as Thiel says, to the political community, that means, and to the church, meaning to the religious community. So the Lockean individual is somebody who has said, no, thank you. I'm not going to sacrifice myself for either the political community or the church. It's going to be about my kind of free, unencumbered, rational self and the pursuit of property. happiness is in effect here a substitute for consumption. And so the difficulties that Thiel sees with Locke's view, I mean, there's several of them, but one, he says, look, Locke has tried to paper over some very important details about economics. In fact, in forming a kind of economistic worldview, Locke had to lie about some things. He had to lie about the violence that sometimes lies at the basis of material resources, and in particular, oil. Because what he says is that some of these non-Western regimes that have become extremely wealthy, they didn't do it in a Lockean manner. They did it because they discovered oil, and their wealth allows them to attack the West. So all of this shakes the foundations of Locke's thought, and that's what Thiel wants us to do. He wants us to re-examine the foundations of our world.
So essentially, this set, battles were so horrible, and it was this Battle of Westphalia that was so awful that we put religion in the back seat, right? This is just recapping kind of what you said. And we tried to, this new system was created this out of Locke's philosophy. And then it was re-examined at 9/11, where, finally we have to realize that there's other people that don't think like us in the West. And therein lies the friend-enemy distinction, which is Carl Schmitt's, one of his things. And perhaps you could go into his philosophy after that.
Sure, yeah. So Thiel says this attack, the 9/11 attacks, they have reminded us that we're not just living in a global, liberal, peaceable world where everybody wants the same things, and if we all reach a certain material standard, we can all just get along. We're in a world where there are still groups of existential conflict, people who want to destroy your way of life and whose way of life you may eventually want to destroy. In other words, friend-enemy divisions. And Schmitt, in his book, The Concept of the Political, he said, that is what the political is. So what's the economic? The economic is fundamentally concerned with profit and loss, or what's advantageous and what's not. The aesthetic is concerned with what's beautiful and ugly. The moral is concerned with what's good and bad. And what's the political? He said it's the friend-enemy division. It's armed groups that want to kill each other. And we were reminded that that still exists, Thiel said, with this attack. And the difficulty is that we'd fallen into the habit of thinking that we have a peaceable world, we want a peaceable world. If we just remove the things that people fight over, there will be no more fights. And he says, no, this attack reminded us the political is still a field where killing at scale happens, where there are friends and enemies who are divided over fundamental questions. And therefore, it's very important for us to reconsider Schmitt in this light, because Schmitt warned his readers against the unbending of the bow of politics, the neutralizations and pacifications and displacements of the political into other fields. The political, you could say, it never really goes away. It just gets suppressed and submerged, and it finds out other places. So the most obvious place where you see this, people say, you hear this all the time. There are many different examples of it. They're like, we're anti-fascists. Okay, what's a fascist? A fascist is somebody who divides the world into us and them. But we're not like that. They're like that. And therefore, the fascists must be destroyed. So that's the return, that's the anti-fascists having an us versus them division, friend and enemy. But at the same time as they're trying to suppress it, and the result is a contradiction or a hypocrisy. And Schmitt warned that in this hypocrisy, normally it's like, okay, let's say you're my enemy. You're not, but let's say, I'm a country, you're my enemy, but I don't dehumanize you. You're just my enemy. You're just a human enemy. But when you try to overcome enmity in the name of humanity, you dehumanize your enemy. And the risk there is something really catastrophic. So Thiel writes about that as well. Schmitt writes about that. And it's like, he says, we should be reminded of this, but we have to be careful, because if the 9/11 attacks make us militant in a friend-enemy distinction again, we're going to lose the soul of what the West wants to become. We're just going to be like a mirror image of the enemy. So he says we got to be careful with Schmitt, because it is still important to the West that we strive for peace, that we don't just want to always have a cutthroat global order. But, Schmitt helps us to see that we do have a cutthroat global order.
Thiel later says, the world of entertainment represents the culmination of the shift away from politics. So we stepped back from that. And a representation of reality might appear to replace reality. Instead of violent wars, there could be violent video games. Instead of heroic feats, there could be thrilling amusement park rides. Instead of serious thought, there could be intrigues of all sort, as in a soap opera. It is a world where people spend their lives amusing themselves to death. And this feels like modern Western culture in a lot of senses. And did we abandon that? After 9/11, it feels like we might have just gone into super modernity where nothing matters. It's nihilism, right? Then Strauss gets into this point of we're at an impasse, right? Or what does Strauss say in terms of we never really fulfilled the friend enemy distinction?
Yeah. So first, let me just say a quick word about Schmidt, because one of the things he was worried about, and Thiel mentions in that passage about entertainment, and it was this worry that when you have the unipolar moment, when you have the victory of capitalist United States at the end of the 90s, there are no more enemies on the world stage. Like in principle, this is the Fukuyama end of history idea. In principle, the battle has been won. Like it was liberalism, communism, fascism, liberalism won, no more enemies. So if politics is friend-enemy distinction, there are no more enemies. That means the political has disappeared. And if it's disappeared, the worry was that people are going to become, trivial somehow, superficial. Like all we're going to do is, gamble, sports, porn, video games, which maybe that's, for some people, that's the ideal. That is the world that we need to strive for, because it's better that people are entertained than that they are killing and being killed. But for Schmidt, the existential threat of a friend-enemy distinction, it shows you that you're serious about life. You're serious about something. You're willing to put something at stake. You're not just indifferent. You don't just want to be entertained. So that's where that comes in. Like, if the political disappears, is that good or bad? Is it possible? And is it good or bad? It's one of the things I mentioned. So Strauss comes into the picture because Strauss is an extremely thoughtful commentator on the whole history of political philosophy. He commented on Schmidt's concept of the political, and he gives Strauss some extra insights. So one of the key insights is this, that on one hand, you have your political order, like checks and balances, a constitution, laws, parties, kind of the everyday, ordinary running machine of government. But you also have, and for Strauss, this is very important, the realm of secrets of state. The thing that not everybody has to know about, because transparency is not the primary virtue. In fact, in some sense, secrecy, intelligently manufactured or manipulated, is the key virtue. Because not everybody needs to know everything. And, there are possibilities for action behind the scenes. So the idea of a kind of subtle, secret, not well publicized, back channel area of messaging, whether for politics or whether for philosophy, is a very important Straussian notion. So Thiel invokes Strauss in part to say, look, here's somebody who understands the complexities of political life. He knows that Locke kind of didn't get the whole picture right. He knows that we need to take Schmidt into account, but he thinks that Schmidt doesn't go far enough somehow in understanding what's at stake in politics. And Strauss leaves us with this area for activity, but it's outside the law in a way. It's not that it's illegal. You see, one of the themes in Strauss's thought is that every political system as a legal order, it has its kind of lawmakers, lawgivers, its founders and all of that, but they have one foot in and one foot out. They have one foot in the system because they're under the laws, they're constrained by it. But as the makers of the laws, as the executives, as the sovereigns, as the legislators, they also have a degree of freedom that most people lack. And he's very interested in what that means. Thiel seems to exploit the theme there of a degree of freedom and of sort of private secret action to say, look, we have a new world of threats. We don't want to become openly belligerent because then we're going to sort of sell the soul of the West and go somehow too militant with Schmidt. But you know what? We can still do some things privately. Only those who know have to know. And maybe the general zeitgeist can be like one thing, and the behind the scenes, secret military operations can be something else. And perhaps Strauss allows us to have that kind of solution to the political problem.
Yeah, he's got a great quote. He says, instead of the United Nations filled with interminable and conclusive parliamentary debates that resemble Shakespearean tales told by idiots, we should consider echelon, the secret coordination of the world's intelligence services, as the decisive path to truly global Pax Americana. Remember, this is 2004. So it feels like that did kind of culminate in a lot of senses, where, maybe that's what kept liberalism going for this next 20 years.
Yeah, I think that's a fair way of seeing it, because you had the resurgence of Schmidt after 9/11, in fact, and you did have the resurgence of this secret intelligence channel and network. I think you're right, although it'd be very interesting to have a 2024 version of the Straussian Moment, which in some sense Thiel is giving us in his recent interviews when he was making some adjustments. But yeah, I think you're right. That behind the scenes intelligence activity kept the 20th century from being finally over. And then Trump 1, followed by Biden, followed by Trump 2, seems to have marked a new era.
So one other thing he leads into is Rene Girard, who, I know we're not as familiar with, but he talks about, I sense, scapegoat theory. Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, the way that Girard comes into the essay and to the thinking is this. So for Strauss, because there's a very important contrast between Girard and Strauss for Thiel, which he mentions explicitly. For Strauss, the gap between the vulgar and the wise, in other words, between those who have to know and are in the know and everybody else who doesn't and can't and shouldn't, is unbridgeable. It's not like history will eventually level the playing ground and we can all learn the same thing about politics. The nature of political life for Strauss is the privilege of the knowing few. For Girard, though, the secret of politics is that you have this sacrificial violence at the heart of it. But the crucial thing that Thiel mentions is that this secret becomes known through time. The secret somehow loses its power. Like it used to be that there's the myth of the scapegoat, but then, where you believe that a person is, you have conflict, mimetic conflict gets centered on one person who gets killed, and that he gets mythologized, and that sort of unites the political community and removes the violence for a little while. But Christianity, in a nutshell, has shown us this mechanism. And so scapegoat violence in principle has been revealed. And over time, this revelation increases in its universality, or in its, people understand it. And so the hidden violence at the heart of politics becomes known for Girard. Whereas the secrets at the heart of politics for Strauss, they don't become known because you cannot bridge the gap between the vulgar and the wise. So that's why Thiel says in his essay, the big question between Strauss and Girard is the question of history. Since in Girard, history provides for gradual insight into this secret at the heart of politics, whereas for Strauss, it doesn't. And when Thiel names his essay The Straussian Moment, I think there are different ways that you can interpret that. And, maybe he's on record somewhere saying exactly why he chose that. But I think there's a case to be made that, regardless of what he says about Girard at the end, Strauss remains an extremely central figure, because he could have just called it the Girardian moment, but he didn't.
And, this idea of a scapegoat, one thing that stood out to me is, they tried to assassinate Trump twice. And clearly, as we saw from the election, it was an overwhelming win by Trump. And I'm kind of wondering in my macro brain, was that moment the scapegoat, where everyone, you change the social contract, and now we're in this new world. And I guess this kind of leads into a whole nother realm that you're an expert in. But what is this new? If we were living in liberalism, and Thiel just said on a podcast, Barry Weiss's podcast, he said, I think the whole thing is how you go bankrupt suddenly, gradually, and then suddenly. And at some point, it's just past the sell date and it's over. Liberalism went on in the zombie way for another 20 years in the 2000s and 2010s. And somehow the 20th century is actually over. And this New Deal liberalism, political correct leftism, this whole constellation of the progressive cult that is the university, these things have finally unraveled. And so now we're entering this new stage. And there's, Michael's an expert in this philosopher named Alexander Dugin, and he's written books on him. He's interviewed him. And so I wanted to explore some of Dugin's ideas. A lot of people, criticize him, and as soon as they hear his name, they just say, oh, it's Russian propaganda. But I don't think they've ever really explored his ideas. So I wanted to have you on to kind of talk about that and, kind of see if this is potentially one of the frameworks that we could be entering in this next era.
Yeah, so let me say a few things quickly. So the first one is that in some sense, the whole democratic establishment, or you could say this in different ways, the whole liberal status quo consensus had made Trump the source of all evil. So they had tried to scapegoat him, pin all of the problems of American politics and populism and this, that, and moral degradation and whatever else. They pin it on him, and that could have gone to the point of killing him. Yes, and then maybe for them that would have been something that they could rally around, and maybe even like have a moment of lamenting the fact that it went so far. Like it could have reproduced a certain sort of mythical structure, but the bullet missed, metaphorically and physically. The attacks did not land, and he gained, as so many people saw after the attempted assassination, whether you like him or not, the mandate of heaven as a kind of mythical status. The fact that it was interpreted as divine intervention and this, that, and the other thing. And it was after the assassination attempt that Musk came out in support of Trump. And that's been a game changer, I think, on the, for the American refounding in some way. I mean, if Musk was not part of the equation, it's a different story that we're looking at. So yeah, on one hand, the attempt to demonize him, then, and I'm not saying it was a deep state plot, I'm just saying unrelated events that can be narratively tied together, the failed assassination attempt that provided a certain sort of mystique or glow or surreal legitimacy to his campaign, something more than you'd expect under other circumstances. So all of that's open, I think, to like mythical interpretation.
Hey everyone, this episode is sponsored by Polkadot. Out of the 500 protocols, one of them is called Origin Trail, and they're building a verifiable internet for AI, ensuring the provenance and verifiability of data to tackle challenges like bias and misinformation in AI systems. Used by global leaders like the British Standards Institution and the Swiss Federal Railways, Origin Trail is vital in sectors like asset tokenization, healthcare, and the metaverse. Powered by Polkadot, Origin Trail enhances the discoverability of crucial knowledge and secures information in the AI era. Power the verifiable internet with Origin Trail at origintrail.io. This episode is sponsored by Ledger. This Black Friday, Ledger is offering an incredible deal to secure your digital assets. From November 29th to December 5th, upgrade to Ledger Flex and get $70 in Bitcoin. Plus, save up to 40% on select Ledger Nano wallets and accessories. These deals are only available while supplies last, so don't wait. Visit Ledger's website at ledger.com today to take advantage of the best offers of the year and protect your assets with the global leader in digital asset security. Today's episode is brought to you by Mantra Chain. Mantra Chain's mainnet has officially launched, marking a major milestone in their journey to become the go-to platform for tokenized real-world assets. Designed as a specialized real-world asset Layer 1 blockchain, Mantra Chain paves the way for traditional financial institutions to enter the Web3 space seamlessly and securely. With a high-performance infrastructure that can handle both permissionless and permissioned applications, Mantra is setting the standard as the home of real-world assets. Plus, they're making waves with big partnerships like their $500 million project with MAG Group and a new collaboration with Zan Bank in the UAE. Mantra Chain is all about building a compliant, scalable future for asset tokenization. Ready to explore the future of asset tokenization? Visit mantrachain.io to learn more and see how they're shaping the finance of tomorrow.
Before we head Dugan, I guess, maybe talk about the Francis Fukuyama and I guess Yuval Harari both basically said, this idea of liberalism is dead, right? He came out publicly and said, not liberalism as we know it. Like, I think people pervert, what the end of the cycle was, like liberalism in terms of, what we ended up with these past couple of years is way different than what the original idea was.
That's right. Liberalism is a word that has several different meanings and connotations and phases and everything like that. But let's just say, something about the way the world was after the 90s, some sort of global consensus that had formed, including its sort of exaggerated and intensified drastic perversions. I mean, the woke liberalism, which Fukuyama mentions in the Financial Times article that he wrote after Trump's win. I think it's where he published it. Yeah. So the idea here is shared by several serious commentators. And the question is the global consensus, is the idea of a global consensus around markets, individual rights, this kind of model of man and the world and his place in the world, the unipolar moment, the American century, all of these different formulations, again, and their kind of offshoots into woke leftism, has that just become like an uncontestable, absolute fait accompli, and it's going to have no serious challengers from anywhere else in the world? It's just a matter of extending and expanding the rule of liberalism and left liberalism globally. And these serious figures, Fukuyama, Thiel, Dugin, he belongs in this conversation. They said at different times, in different ways, this is not sustainable. Now, Fukuyama thinks it's lamentable that this has come to an end. When he wrote after Trump's election, he said, it's not good that this has ended. We're going to have to try to stop it. Thiel writes about it. Maybe he sees certain prospects about this new world. When Dugin writes about it, he's excited by it. He's encouraged by it because he didn't like the liberal consensus. But they all agree there's a phase shift. Whatever period we were living in, whatever shared assumptions it had, whatever telos, it was aiming towards, that's been shaken in a very radical way. And then they begin the analysis. How did we get here? Where did it go wrong? Where were we going? What can we expect? What's the nature of the change in the conflict? How does it play itself out politically, culturally, economically, socially, in the arts and everywhere else? People saw, presumably, Jaguar put out their woke ad, and that 6 months ago, maybe that would have flown. In a world where Kamala Harris won, maybe that would have flown. But the zeitgeist has changed. That was okay for a while, but now it's not. People have rejected it. So what does that mean? What's the nature of that rejection? And all of these people have analyzed, each in their own way, this question from different angles. I know that a lot of people who have heard about Dugin, if they're not already partial to his thought, they maybe see him as like, a Russian jingoist or, totally pro-Putinist. But independently of that, his analysis of the kind of ideological lay of the land, of the limits of liberalism, they're prescient. In fact, I'll just say, if you don't mind, really quickly here, my first big public interview, how I became known by anybody, my first big public interview on Canadian TV was almost exactly 10 years ago. It was in December of 2014, where I talked about Dugin's book, The Fourth Political Theory, which I had translated at the time. And if anybody watches that, it was a blueprint for so much of what happened in the next 10 years. And I can tell you that smart people, not in academia was against this, not in government never asked me, but smart, pretty significant private investors over the last 10 years have known the world is changing, yes, somehow, yes. Dugin matters, yes, and therefore we need a briefing on how Dugin helps us understand the changing of the world. I can attest to that over the last 10 years. So love him or hate him, he offers models that sort of help to make sense of the changes.
It's helped me, whether or not this future does turn out to be, multipolar. I'll let you explain it a little bit more. But I think, from what I'm seeing, my general macro framework is that we're watching incumbents, giant monopolistic corporates that have basically bullied people, for years on the regulatory side, are crumbling. People are pushing back. Capital is susceptible to labor now in the ways that it hasn't been before. And a lot of these macroeconomic things that we were just used to are coming crumbling down. So, and I think, the baseline political philosophy layer is really important. Hopefully we're describing this properly, but and we can get into some of the investment things that I think at the end, but let's attack Dugin and see what's inside his brain right now.
I'll give you the simplest first model. Okay. Now he says a lot of things now about what's the significance of Trump's win. And, he's meeting with different players on the world stage and helping them to articulate their own position in the world. But let's start with the first model. Okay. The first model was that the 20th century was a war of ideology between liberalism, communism, and fascism. That's pretty accurate. It's a simplification, but it's, all models are. It shows us something. Fascism was defeated, communism was defeated, liberalism was the last ideology standing. That's accurate. That pretty much describes where we were in the 90s. When liberalism no longer had enemies, that's the Schmidt component, it transformed. It sort of turned in on itself. It started to fight somehow the enemy within. Anybody who still had, clung to their guns and their religion. Anybody who still represented old ways of thinking. All of these people were interpreted as kind of enemies of the open society. So liberalism undergoes this attack on itself when it no longer has any other enemies. And it moves us into these weird things like post-humanism and transgenderism, because liberalism is an attack on collective identity. And to be a man is a collective identity. To be a woman is a collective identity. To be a human being is a collective identity. So it attacks even being human in the name of post-humanism or transhumanism. So he says, what if you don't like the basic premises of liberalism? Okay, you don't think they're adequate, they don't reflect your aspirations, and you just don't think they get the fundamental question of human nature right? back to Thiel. Thiel said the question of human nature is like the most important question. Modernity tried to bury it, but you can't bury it. So Dugin agrees. We need to raise the question. So what if we are not, through and through liberals, but we don't want to be either communists or fascists? We need a fourth political theory. We need some mental space, some breathing room to even be able to analyze the three political theories from some other point of reference. When I first heard that, it captured everything I was noticing around me. If you're not a liberal and you're not on the left, you're called a fascist. That's still true in many cases, because it just shows you people aren't thinking outside of those categories. So even just to be able to position yourself outside of that for analytical purposes is very valuable. And then in doing so, he began to make statements about, well, okay, what can we predict about the shape of the coming global world order if there are going to be attackers against liberal unipolarity? So Dugin said he foresaw and he acted on behalf of, like he's an agitator as well as an analyst. So he both saw and wanted and helped to inaugurate what he sees as a multipolar world. A multipolar world, it's a big topic for him. It's a world where it's not just United States global hegemony. Incidentally, something that Thiel also worries about, a one world government. Thiel said in his recent interviews, he's like, okay, somebody's worried about nuclear war, somebody's worried about the environment. But you know what? Above all of these problems stands an even bigger problem of the one world government that's going to solve that other problem. And so if you're worried about a one world government, well, in some sense, multipolarity is the opposite of that. It's many centers of power. What they are is a different question. Are they going to be states? Are they going to be blocks? Are they institutions? For Dugin personally, they happen to be civilizational blocks. For him, the poles of a multipolar world are civilizations. And just to say one other very quick line here, anybody who applied a civilizationalist lens to the political arena in the last 10 years would not have been surprised by Russia-Ukraine, would not have been surprised by the rise of a Russia-China axis. I mean, these things could only catch people by surprise if they were completely asleep, to the shifting nature of the world order from unipolarity to multipolarity. So this, anybody who's reading Dugin 10 years ago, not that he's the only one. I mean, in the 90s, Samuel Huntington said to Fukuyama, it's not going to be a unipolar world. It's going to be a world of civilizations clashing. So the civilizationalist thesis was there, but it's been extremely helpful in predicting somehow and seeing and for sure in interpreting this, global conflicts and realignments.
And to bring this is a crypto podcast. So to bring it together, like when I hear multipolarity, I hear decentralization. I hear, the US dollar was, it could still be a hegemon in terms of if they get a Bitcoin standard and back the dollar with Bitcoin. But, we've even seen Bukele today. He tweeted out the returns of his Bitcoin holdings, and they went up, I think it was like $300 million for El Salvador. And so you're seeing these countries previously that were under this unipolarity, now they're multipolar, and they're becoming actually, more self-sufficient on their own. And I thought just to make that connection, we've watched the rise of Bitcoin as the rise of the multipolarity has happened at the same time. And so I don't know, I always think that's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, it is an interesting connection. Absolutely. I mean, the fact that El Salvador was one of these early adopters is significant, I think, if you just look at how they're positioning themselves, even in the discourse on the global stage about values and about sovereignty and about, they're clearly pushing back against, like, let's call it, generally speaking, the Soros-led world of NGOs. There's like saying, we're not going to do that. So it's not just that the money is changing. It's not just because it would be, it's kind of like a package deal to some extent that, to my mind, this is one way of looking at it. Going into Bitcoin as the future of their prosperity is, it has its correlates on the criminal level where they're imprisoning their gang members. It's not like these two things are completely unrelated. They're acts of genuine sovereignty and statesmanship. So it's no longer enough to just, Thiel wrote for the latest edition of the Sovereign Individual, which I guess for many people is like, a prescient book in sort of anticipating some of these developments in, in digital currencies and whatever else, right? As source of value, because the idea is, the state will have less power over you if you can have, assets and resources like Bitcoin. So that Thiel, for whom again, theology, apocalypse, revelation, and Bitcoin, like it's not arbitrary that it fits into the picture there, because as the system moves, a big part of a system is its underlying economic architecture. So I think it was sell the past, buy the future. It is not just with the stores of value and with the national currency reserves. It's also with what was the future, what is the future, what was the past, what is the present. So for any serious thinker, one thing I'll share, I mean, this may be surprising to the people who are listening to this or not, but I mentioned my background is in academic, philosophy, reading Plato, Aristotle, Heidegger, all of these figures who are really interesting to me. It's not in economics, it's not primarily in Bitcoin, it's not in investing, but I had people coming to study with me. They want to study, obscure philosophers and, like analysis of sovereignty, Giorgio Agamben and all this stuff. And they are fully into Bitcoin. And for them, these things are intimately related. Like the analysis of sovereignty and the analysis of Bitcoin, for them, that's one and the same conversation. I'm helping on the philosophical side. They're connecting it to their investment thesis or to their even like moral and political and philosophical thesis about the significance of this new technology for human history.
That's one of the reasons why I thought this would be such a powerful interview is it really gives a baseline. If you have conviction on these political shifts happening, that it makes it easier to hold the investment. If you don't believe in that investment existentially, you're not going to hold on to it. And so if you notice big cultural shifts happening, it does make it easier to hold investments and, participate in the return of those shifts in philosophy. So that's part of the reason why I wanted you on here. But yeah, so we hit, the fourth political theory, and you talked about how liberalism started eating itself. If you're not, communist, you're a fascist, et cetera. So where do we go from there in Dugin's mind?
So this basic idea of the fourth political theory, it gives him a critical perspective on liberalism, communism, and fascism, which is helpful. But then he does develop sort of the positive elements of his own theory. As I say, multipolarity is one of them. The return of those topics that modernity marginalized. So the return of theology and theological conflict. Again, the very point that Thiel opened his Straussian Moment essay with, right? We now need to think again seriously about theological topics. So Dugin brings that in. In some sense, mysticism. Modern enlightenment was primarily a scientific. Now, he now does not reject all of science and so on. But what he says is one of the things that science pushed off to the margins was, let's say, symbolic thinking, interpretive thinking, mystical thinking. And this is another maybe surprising insight, maybe not now, because I think it's becoming more and more visible. You have a return of theology, you have a return of religion, and you do have a return of mysticism, making new ways of understanding what's taking place. So people want to know, even if you think we're in a new era, what is an era? Are these cycles, is it like a fourth turning sort of thing? Are we out of the Kali Yuga? Like, is there a new, there's this book about the return of the strong gods, and a nice book. It's not a book about, it says we'd been living in an era where, the divine and the sacred were at play. They were just at play in a certain way. And so, Dugin reorients us not all the time to this. He says, look, we need to reconsider everything that modernity pushed out. Means that we need to study the pre-modern philosophers, and some aspects of postmodern philosophy are still helpful to us. So he's got a big kind of intellectual task for understanding where were we, where are we, and what may be coming. In the question, what may be coming, he really takes a position against the world that Biden represented. The Biden, Kamala, this is, again, not everybody has to agree with this, but in Dugin's analysis, the tendency of that Great Reset, globalism, the tendency of that was towards the destruction of humanity, towards the destruction of the human essence. Okay, more transgenderism, more posthumanism, more uprooting of us, and more erasing the human being and the human identity. That's what he was expecting from that. And more wars, In fact, what the Biden administration is doing now with Russia is straight out of Dugin's playbook in some sense. It's like the forces of the Great Reset, they do not want a world where you have relatively peaceable relations between different civilizational blocks. They can't have that. They can't have, Russia cannot be an equal partner in any sense. Biden would like to have that destroyed, before he has to give up any power. So Dugin's analysis is kind of along those lines. It has a geopolitical dimension, has several theoretical components. Again, it's not my view that a person has to agree with everything that Dugin says. It is my view, though, that his analysis is always insightful, often very interesting, even if from time to time it's over the top. So that's, as he develops his idea of the fourth political theory, he's always kind of giving us, a perspective from which to view it. You know what I mean? One that's not our customary way, and therefore that shows us something new. And Thiel, by the way, this is another thing. In the Straussian Moment, he says, we can no longer take our Enlightenment complacencies for granted. Like, we need to look at the world fresh. That means we need the perspectives of people who see it unlike we're used to. Dugin's not the only one, but he's very noteworthy in that regard.
Yeah, one of the things, I learned from you, studying with you is Leo Strauss was Jewish, and, one of his big influencers was Martin Heidegger, who was basically a Nazi, right? And so he would explore those thoughts, and he even said he was the most influential, modern contemporary philosopher at the time, I believe. And so it's important to, as an academic, and taking my academic roots back out, I'll listen to anything. But some people just have this aversion to, exploring the unknown, I guess.
Yeah, I would say, I'm not in finance, okay, but I talk to people who are in finance, and my understanding is that it's very helpful. It's a very helpful skill that you can transfer from the study of ideas and history and philosophy to the analysis of markets and investment theses and other things like that, economics, because if you have the flexibility and the pliability to consider from the, in a contrarian way or from the side, or, what if this was, Thiel's a perfect example of that. You see it when he's interviewed, that he could just give a stock answer, but he stops, he thinks it through, and he tells you something that you might not have seen. And, why is he such a successful macro investor? Because presumably, if you can do that, things that are invisible to other people will become visible to you. Whether you agree with that tendency, whether you want that tendency, you can see more if you develop this sort of flexibility, I think. It's definitely true in political philosophy. I mean, there are in and out of academia people who say, I will never read Martin Heidegger because he was a member of the Nazi Party. It's true that he was a member of the Nazi Party. And it's true that Nazis were terrible people. And it's true that we shouldn't, celebrate anything that is a Nazi contribution, let's say. But it's indisputable among all thinking people that Heidegger was not just some, he was the greatest philosopher of our time. And so now anybody who looks at that question has to make a choice for themselves. Am I able to learn from him something that is valuable, even though there are things about him that I completely reject? And even the puzzle, how can somebody who's so brilliant also have made this political commitment that I so strongly disagree with? The puzzle itself forces us to want to go deeper into the question. I know there are a lot of people who don't want to do that, and that's okay. But I think that the thinkers, the sort of like prophets, the innovators, the early adopters, the heretics, the people who have some, whatever you want to call them, right? They like that mystery. They like that puzzle. They want to try to solve it. They want to try to understand it. And they do follow the old dictum that a wise man learns from everyone. It doesn't make any sense to cut off, if you could learn from somebody, why would you cut them off? So this doesn't make any sense to me. But I don't think it's a task that everybody can do or wants to do. I think that's pretty obvious. But the question is, what's the upside for the people who might want to do it? And Dugin, I gotta say just one thing, just really briefly, I'm not an expert on every Russian thinker. You know what I'm saying? I one thinker who really stood out for me, and yet because everybody else rejected him sort of automatically, everybody in my milieu rejected him automatically, I was like the one-eyed man in the land of the blind. I didn't have to know 100 thinkers, but you could foresee things from 10 miles away that these people still can't see, even though it ran them over. You know what I mean? Yeah. Because they just weren't willing to look. They were like Plato's slaves in the cave allegory. They can't look to the left. They can't look to the right. They only see the shadows. And if you show them the light, they run back down to the shadows. So you can't do much with those people.
I think that synopsizes every crypto person who's been in it for years, because they have been the iconoclast screaming and that this is the truth, and no one gives them the time of day. And I think they're starting to feel a little bit vindicated here as Bitcoin almost hits $100,000 a Bitcoin, which is kind of incredible. But maybe touch on the Great Awakening of Dugan, and maybe talk about the logos, I guess.
Sure. So in this book, The Great Awakening versus the Great Reset, which was written when Biden had won the election, Dugan has an analysis of sort of the tendencies that got us to where we are. And he separates it into like the deep historical tendencies. So there's a movement in medieval theology about, are universals real or not? Okay, I won't go into the details, but he says, look, that's where we have to understand even the modern liberalism, because there's a line from that old debate to this one. But when it comes to the Great Awakening, he says, look, here's what it is. You have in the United States, at least half the country, and all around the world, people who, without a theoretical model, they're not necessarily philosophers, but they instinctively feel something has gone way off. Something is completely wrong. Globalists are trying to destroy us, whatever formulation it is. So he says, there are conspiratorial formulations like the QAnon stuff. There are more solid and well-founded formulations. There's a spectrum between the people who have some theoretical capacity and who don't, but it's all of them feel, we have to say no to this march of progressivism because it's going to destroy humanity, either through a world war or through some sort of technological apocalypse or through something else. And it's a kind of spontaneous reaction against that. And he sees it represented in some movements in Europe. He sees it represented in multipolarity. Multipolarity is a big no said to the universalism of the Great Reset. And he sees it represented in the opposition to liberal Democrats in the United States. So roughly, it's not that, we say Trumpism somehow for him represents the American version of the Great Awakening, because it says, look, yeah, you know what? We do want to have security, prosperity, humanity, beauty, wealth, strength, history, tradition, like all of these things that our ideological enemies are trying to destroy. They say it's bad. We say it's good. They have been trying to beat into our heads that everybody's a racist, everybody's a fascist, and everybody's working for the Russians. And they just want to say, no, like we want to be free and we want to be strong and we want to be human. And that spark or that impulse represents for him, or he calls it, the Great Awakening. And he has an analysis of how it plays itself out in the United States and around the world. And Trump's 2024 electoral victory is something that Dugan would interpret as the victory of the Great Awakening over the Great Reset. And therefore it has changed the dynamics. Like Bukele said after the election, it hasn't just changed the administration, it's changed the course of history. I think Dugan agrees with that analysis because, again, one thing, to take it back to where I started, this takes a bit of practice. It may seem outlandish at first. Thiel is a perfect example of it. But if you can learn to, just as an experiment, correlate the everyday visible level of politics, who won office, who lost office, what's taking place here, what's going up, what's going down, with the deeper metaphysical, philosophical, ontological, theological trends, then you can always, so that's what Bukele said, this represents something deeper. It's like civilizational, it's a cycle, it's something, it's the soul of humanity. It could have gone one way, instead it went another way. So Dugan shares that type of analysis. But at the deepest level for him, and again, it's really fascinating that this should be the case. I mean, you might say it's not too surprising that philosophers care about the question of who is the human being. But when investors and people like Thiel start to say that question matters in a huge way, not just for merely philosophical reasons, but for actionable entrepreneurial reasons, that's really interesting. So Dugan and Thiel agree there's nothing more important than the question of the human being, and the Great Awakening saved that question. A Biden win would have destroyed the human future for Dugan.
For Dugan, yeah. And, whether or not that's, the reality we're living with, it's at least a framework to explore. And, personally, what I've learned from you is things are changing, and there are institutions being built. I'm a big believer in the Neil Howe fourth turning framework. I think we probably crossed over, the Girardian scapegoat / fourth turning into this first turning. You're seeing these new institutions like the Department of Government Efficiency that emerges. Those institutions, that's a first turning institution. And what are the tangentials to that? If you have a much more functioning government, one of them that I've been concentrating on is nuclear power. And nuclear power used to have these big, roadblocks to build these things. And because of natural, nuclear issues of, 3 Mile Island and the one in Japan. And now, if you have less regulatory red tape to build these things, perhaps our whole infrastructure starts, getting built faster and faster. So there's lots of, understanding these political kind of ramifications can unleash a lot of great investment ideology. So I just wanted to plug you a little bit and say, first off, thank you for being a friend and a mentor. And if you want to reach out to Michael, you can find him at millermanschool.com. And where else?
So I'm on YouTube, where I have the reading of the Straussian Moment and many other videos. That's youtube.com/Millerman. So /@Millerman, Millerman. And on Twitter, I'm M_Millerman. Those are my main channels: YouTube for videos, Twitter, X for whatever's top of mind, and the school for the paid courses.
Well, thanks so much for being here, and we'll see if people like it. If they don't, maybe it's the wrong rabbit hole, but I wanted to give them a different taste of something.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, I would say if anybody has like a follow-up question or something that they want me to address that we said here that sort of piqued their interest, reach out in any of those channels, and I'm happy to try to peel it back a little bit more.
Okay. Thanks so much, Peter.
There's over 500 protocols building on Polkadot, and one of them is called Polymech. Polymech is a decentralized, community-driven funding protocol on Polkadot, enabling regulatory-compliant and transparent fundraising of Web3. Polymech ensures compliance with a novel KYC AML process, facilitating a trustless and automated funding process from fundraising to token distribution. By removing intermediaries, Polymech offers accessible, inclusive, and transparent funding opportunities for all participants. Powered by Polkadot, Polymech is redefining fundraising in the crypto space. Explore how to become a Polkadot VC at polymech.org.